Yeah, on easy mode on Nvidia cards with its 5 encoders. Well, yeah, I mean, 5090, go figure, right? I mean, I have what? I have 4 encoders too, but I'm only leveraging the AVI ones, not the 264 because they're not as good, to be honest with you. Now that might change with the newer cards, but I'm not picking up the 9070 XT. I'm waiting for the next one that's a proper replacement for my card. Even the 5080 has 5. Well, I'm sure it's an architecture thing, right? Like I'm sure all the 50 series cards probably have the same level of encoders. I'm sure like the 5060 when it comes out will probably have that many too. Yeah, all of them do. Yeah, I mean that's base level. And that's the thing is I'd love to have the newer stuff that AMD has on the newer cards, but I'm not about to ready to take a downgrade on RAM and some other stuff in that regard. Yes, it has better ray tracing, but I haven't seen it really affect me a whole lot. The only game that I think that might affect it is Black Myth Wukong, but then again, that game's weird. So, yeah. Um, but we'll see with the next one. AMD cards or camp at Micro Center. Well, I'll tell you right now. I went to Micro Center on Thursday, and there was first of all, I'm keeping an eye out. There was no Nvidia cards hardly at all. There was like nothing, and there was like I don't know 12 or so cards that were 25 plus in stock, and like, there was a line out the wazoo, and that was at 11. And I was like, "Wow, really?" Um, and by the end of the day, I have to check. I think they sold through pretty much all of it. So they sold a ton of cards. Now, long term, what are we looking at? Like, you know, AMD was sitting on those cards since January. Nvidia, they released in their cards, but I think they were somewhat limited. And the Chinese New Year, right? And then it takes time for shipping. They're not paying for air shipping. So we'll have to see, right? We'll have to get a few weeks to months, and really the big question is going to be also on the 4060. How's that sell? What do we or 5060? What does that look like? The 5060 Ti. What does the 9060 look like? The 9060 XT, and are they going to release a 9050? On the AMD side, what about Nvidia? Are they going to actually finally release another lower end card? They haven't released a low end card since the 3050, and that's kind of crazy. By some other should be turned. Oh yeah, I'm sure. Now the real question ends up being is, do they attempt to shift where the cards are manufactured to avoid tariffs? That's another question. I have no inkling on that at all. And the stuff they're talking about now making chips is going to take time. 5060 and 5050 is planned. Yeah, and of course they're always going to have a higher volume with those because they don't need as much of a cut down die, so they should be able to pump out a lot more cards, hopefully. But we'll have to see because the higher ones, let's be honest, they're prioritizing the AI stuff and selling those off, right? So I can't fault them for that. They make mad money on that, right? Let me see. I'll sell it for $2,000 or 30 grand. Let's see. I mean, it's a business decision. Yeah. Well, I mean, the other weird thing is the ROPs that are missing in some of the cards. That's kind of disconcerting. It's like, man, you paid all this money and like you're missing parts or you're not getting a fully vetted card. That's kind of messed up. It is, but still, if you're paying $2,000 for a top line card, you don't expect it to be nerfed in any way, right? Let alone it seemed to carry down, and I don't know if it's just they were hoping no one would notice. Um, yeah, that'll be fixed. I'm not so much worried about it. In fact, that might have even been the first go around. You know what I mean? Just to get them out the door. It's just really sorry. Well, the problem is just an RMA fix. You say that, but if I call up the company and I say I want an RMA fix and they expect me to ship it to them, and now I'm out of a card for a couple of months or weeks, who knows? Well, they should. But again, for me, if I was in that situation, I couldn't do that because then I'd have to stop streaming because I don't have another backup card. So that's not going to work for me. Other people, they could probably get around that, less of an issue. Um, you know, but yeah, it's totally a production thing. I don't expect that to be a long-term issue. Um, though to be honest with you, so far people have gotten cards right away. Well, that I'm glad to hear that because man, it's a tough situation because there's a lot of people who can't even buy them, which sucks. So I'm glad they have someone on the side and they're taking care of that. Um, I am disconcerted a little bit about the power meltdown on the 5090s though. I personally, I'm like, I understand why they're trying to do the just the one connector. Realistically, though, I'm starting to wonder if they really should be doing two connectors on that thing. Just simply because you don't hear about these meltdown issues on the lower end cards because they're just not pulling as much power. And I don't think it's going to get much better. Um, but I don't know. Couldn't really tell you about that. That makes more sure the plugged in right issue. Well, I know some of the manufacturers are color coding some of the what's it called? The connector, and you can see if it's colored and whatnot. But the weird thing is on this time, I think it's a little bit different. This time, from what they were showing with some of the stuff with the Bauer and whatnot, it was more of a problem where they had like less connector pins on the actual motherboard itself. And what was happening was it was doing path release resistance, and we were hitting so much current, it's going through the one plug, and it always seems to be. And what was weird, it also affected it on the power supply as well. It wasn't just on the one end where it would be a connection thing. It was almost like it was pulling way too much current through one of the cables versus the other. Well, I mean, maybe. I mean, I don't know. And that's the other thing is, are they rushing on the cables? I mean, we're having problems with ROPs, or we having problems with cables. Do they have a bad manufacturer? Because I know they don't make the cables. I'm sure they contract that stuff out. I mean, plus, um, is some of it the power supply people, right? Like, is this fault on the power supply people? Because, if you're not plugging into if you're not using their adapter, right? Which I think that's what some are. It's probably a third party cable. It's probably from the actual power supply. Because here's the thing: if I'm not using the dongle adapter, then I'm going to use the pin connector from the power supply, right? I'm not going to have an extender. And I think a lot of people are trying to do that, but yeah, they're not doing a great job. Some of them are, some of them are. In fact, I think Jay did a thing where he saw some weird variants of the actual pins on the connector. Like one was actually like kind of like down a little bit, and it's like, what the heck? No wonder they're having problems. I don't understand how they're making mistakes like this. Either they're not doing quality checks, or something's going down. And given the fault tolerance that you just don't have on this connector compared to the old ones, it's kind of an issue. Yeah, well, and here's the thing, only Nvidia is doing it. Now, AMD is starting to get into it, I think, with the Sapphire card for the 7090 XT. So as more of them do it, maybe it'll be a little better. I think over time it'll resolve itself. Intel still isn't doing it yet, but again, they're not pushing the power, so it's kind of weird. Oh yeah, trust me. Yeah, and plus, here's the other thing is, some of the people, if they're having problems, is it more of an issue if they're a tester or someone who's constantly plugging and unplugging things. But weirdly enough, Jay did a test on that, and it actually got better with more use, which was weird. It almost sounds like it's uh, an initial quality check that they didn't bother doing. Well, you say that, but then again, I saw DeBauer and some of them who know exactly what's going on, and they've run into some issues. But again, I personally think it's a quality check or issue with the power supply people. Um, you know, it's hard to say. Um, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. All I do know is I'm not buying a 5090 right now. In fact, I don't plan on buying a new card for a while because I've already bought this recently, so I don't plan on doing anything else. I don't know, been doing this in the 90s, so I've been doing this from the 2000s, no problems. There I think the color coding on some of the connectors, and again, here's the other thing is how much you're spending on the thing. The ones that I think that have color coded on the actual connector where you can actually see whether it's plugged in or not, and if it's loose, they tend to, from what he saw, had better connectors and better quality because they actually spent money on it, right? AMP traits, I mean, chicken connectors are just no more for me. Yeah, that's the problem though. Most normal gamers don't know this crap. You're lucky they know how to plug in things correctly. So if there's not enough fault tolerance in there, it becomes an issue. And then the color thing, I think it's brilliant. Why they didn't do that to begin with on the 50 series, or even when they start having issues, is beyond me. Like, I guess they didn't think it was an issue. I'm not entirely sure. because I saw some of them where they could back out fairly easily. I think they're a little bit better with this round on the 50 series cards than the previous one. It's weird that we didn't have this problem as much with the 30 series, like 3090 cards, which was weird. I don't know what that's about. But they also changed up how they did the connectors as well, which is also kind of important. So, but yeah, you got to remember, yeah, you're in that trade, so you're gonna not trust anything. You're gonna verify everything. Unfortunately, that is not the majority of people. I hate to say this. Most cards from there will still use the 8-pin. Well, you say that, but I'm saying they had the connector on the 3090 cards, and weirdly enough, we never heard of any meltdown or whatever issues with that. Now, I don't know if that's because it wasn't pulling enough current or wattage to where it got to be a problem, and maybe that's the case. I'm not entirely sure. Now, it didn't have the sense pins on it either. It only had the other stuff. My 3080, yeah, the 3080, it was the 3090 that though I think had that PCI or the newer connector. It just didn't have the sense pins. But yeah, that's what the 3080 had. It had the 3 8-pin. Well, that's what mine has. Mine has the PCI Express 8 pins and whatnot. And pretty much all the 90s, 70s, and XTs pretty much are for the most part. But then again, they're not pulling current like the 5090 is. So no need. Now, their next card, which is going to come up sooner than I think probably, I'm going to say in about a year. They're not going to wait 2 years. I have a feeling that's up in the air. I have no idea. Only the FEs use the HP connector then? Yeah, yes. It was specifically the FE card of 3090. It was not any of the at least I don't think it was any of the vendor cards at all. So the AIBs. But definitely it was the founders edition. Yep. Um but no, that one it was weird how we had problems with the 4090, and I don't think we ever had problems with the 4080. But then again, I think it's because it wasn't pulling as much current. I think realistically, I think there is something in the design when you pull so much current through, if there's anything off, it just has problems and it's just not as forgiving. Ad? What, you have an ad? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know there was an ad on there. And what's funny is I think that ad is Mecha BREAK. Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. Because I have a thing I'm looking at now. Wow, they're pretty aggressive with those ads, aren't they? Wow. Oh, did it? Hold on. I can't see. There we go. But yeah, they went to single rail on the 50s. Oh, it was single rail? What, on the 5080s or just the 50 series in general? All the 50 series card. Gotcha. Yeah, well, I think part of the 40 series was a single connector. If I'm not mistaken. Like the 4080 I think had it. I can't remember if the 5070 did or 4070 had it or not. Um, but yeah, I'm not too surprised. Heck, I think probably, I'll be honest, I won't be surprised if they do that with the 5060 simply to save cost, right? Like, why have multiple different connectors? I totally get that, right? It's probably overkill for what they need, but still, it makes it just simpler in general. Also, then it makes it simpler for their customers because then if they have a power supply with that connector, they're just unplugging and plugging in it. No different than if you had PCI Express. The Blizoid video has the best video on the issue. Okay, well, I'll have to check that out. Um, I do find it fun. I don't know if you got the ad, but I looked at it, and the Twitch ad was Mecha BREAK, which is funny. um, yeah. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, the weird thing is I figured they're using the same connector for the professional cards, I would think. And we haven't heard any issue with them, but then again, maybe they're not pushing the power as much, or maybe they have a different connector for those. It's really hard to say when it comes to the professional environment. Because usually, uh, this is what makes it strange. I would figure they would use the same connector for the professional cards as they would use for the. Watch that video. Okay. I will open that in our tab, and I will look at that a little bit later. Um, but yeah, it's very strange because I would think, and this is what's throwing me off about this whole thing. This was something developed by Intel and everyone else, and I would think they would use this connector first in the professional space, make sure it was solid or whatnot, and they wouldn't beta test it in the user space. But maybe they would. I'm not entirely sure. So that's using a whole other type of connector type. Oh, they are using a different connector type. But why? I mean, I guess because they're in a chassis, so they're a little bit different. And I guess because they're going to be using something that does multiple graphics cards. Yeah, I guess it would be a little bit different, probably. Um, interesting. It gets power via the PCB edge. Ah, okay. Well, it's probably more efficient anyway. It shortened the amount of distance between the power supply and everything else. I mean, it kind of makes sense. Plus, you want to make it slottable. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me in the least. Um, though, I mean, there was some talks about doing something similar with back edge stuff on some other boards and stuff. They've been mucking with that a little bit. But though I still have a question whether or not if you don't seat it right, the card, would it still work? It would be a bit of an issue. So